welcome the Minister for Local Government, Minister David Michael. We're also very pleased to see that we have over 330 people registered for tonight's webinar, and congratulations to you for your interest in becoming a local government elected member. The program for the webinar is as per the screen. Minister for Ports, Local Government, Road Safety, Minister assisting the Minister for Transport, the Honourable David Michael, and Minister Michael will speak to the importance of local government in Western Australia. I will provide an overview of why being an elected member is important in our communities. Robert Kennedy, WA Electoral Commissioner, together with Phil Richards, Manager of Election Events, will present on the process and key dates on running to become a local government councillor in 2023. Mustafa Yildiz, Director of Support and Engagement, Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries. The role will speak on the role of the Department of Local Government, Sports and Cultural Industries as the regulator of the Local Government Act and regulations and key compliance provisions for elected members and candidates, including the Code of Conduct requirements. Then James McGovern, Manager of Governance and Procurement at WELGA, will speak on the purpose of local government, the role of an elected member and conflicts of interest. Finally, at the end of the evening, questions will be facilitated by Tony Brown, Executive Director, Member Services. There will be opportunity for participants to engage by asking questions during the session or via email after the session. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for local governments to post on their website for candidates from their local communities to view. Our aim is we are aiming for 1.5 hours, even though it does state for 2. So we're going to ask for all of us to be succinct this evening, and I have reminded everybody but the Minister. So first of all, I have great pleasure in introducing the Minister for Ports, Local Government, Road Safety, Minister assisting the Minister for Transport, the Honourable David Michael. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Karen. And I'd like to also acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and thank WELGA for hosting this webinar. Can I acknowledge you as the President of WELGA, to Mr. Robert Kennedy, the WA Electoral Commissioner, and to everyone dialing in and watching. Thank you for considering running in a local government election. Local governments have incredible power. They're the closest tier of government to people, and because of this, they can be a driving force that creates positive change for many in our community. Councillors play a major part in this, representing the interests of their communities and making decisions on the future of their local area. The role of the councillor is an important one. They lead and guide the community, decide how money is spent, and propose ideas to make their part of the state a great place to live. I ran for election to my local council back in 2005 because I wanted to make a difference in improving the community facilities within my ward of the City of Stirling. I learned a lot when I was on council. I learned how local governments deliver a wide range of services. I saw how productive councils can be when they work together. And I saw how local government works best when councils work closely and productively with their CEO to get the best possible outcomes for the public we serve. Being on a council can be extremely rewarding. It's an opportunity and an experience that's open to practically everyone, even if you are chosen at an election. It's also really important that everyone who runs for election understands what the role of a councillor is all about. There are a few myths about being on the council. For example, there's an old myth that if you're elected in a ward, you only serve your ward. That's not true. When you're elected to a council, you have the responsibility to make decisions in the best interests of everyone in the local government district. There's a myth that councils are like parliaments. That is not true. Councils aren't parliaments. They operate more like a board. And because of this, the role of a councillor is usually to work to find consensus on how to best address issues and make decisions. If you run for election this year or vote in the election, you'll see many reforms coming to effect. Many of you may be aware that the Cook State Government is delivering the biggest set of local government reforms in more than 25 years. For example, the change to optional preferential voting is intended to give ratepayers the greatest possible say in who they vote for. This reform will ensure that the elected council best represents the people of the district. The introduction of optional preferential voting will also mean that vacancies that happen within a year of an ordinary election may be able to be backfilled by the next highest polling candidate from that election. In practice, this might mean that if you narrowly miss out on being elected on election night, there is still a chance that you might get an opportunity to serve on the council if a vacancy comes off later on. The reforms are increasing the information available for voters. That means that as a candidate, you will have an opportunity to present more information about yourself, ensuring that voters get to know what you stand for. Other major reforms to bolster diversity in local government are also being progressed as part of the reforms. We're introducing parental leave entitlements for council members. Local governments will soon be able to pay education expenses for council members, and amendments to support local governments to pay superannuation to council members are being progressed in the next tranche of legislation. Together, these reforms will support a wider range of people to consider running for election at local government. These reforms are huge and a positive step forward for council members across Western Australia. As a previous Deputy Mayor of a local government and now as Minister for Local Government, I know how important it is for candidates to be fully aware of what their role might look like, what to expect, and the rules that apply to all candidates for local government elections. This webinar will provide you with the information you need to know at this point of your journey. Lastly, it's important that our councils reflect the diversity of people that live within their boundaries and, more widely, the diversity of the state. And I know that because you're listening to this, you're interested in becoming a councillor, and I really encourage you to take the next step and nominate. We need people of all backgrounds, personalities, life experiences, beliefs, skills and talents to put their hand up to serve their community. If you're thinking about running, you should. There is a huge opportunity for you to serve your community, to learn new things and to make a real difference in your part of WA. And thanks again for hosting me this evening, Walga. Thank you and good luck to the campaign ahead.
Thank you, Minister. So I would like to give you my thoughts on why being an elected member is important in our communities. Local government has a wide range and breadth of activities from roads, parks and gardens, town planning, building approvals, health regulation, waste collection, disposal, libraries, dog and cat control, street lighting, aged care, childcare, sport, recreation and cultural facilities, and there is so much more. Local government is the constant in all of our communities. Many things come and go. However, local government is always there in emergencies, in day-to-day activities and special events. So I too was elected in 2005. So I've been at the Shire of Morawa for as many years as we can add up, 18 years. And I've been president since 2009, so 14 years as president. Like anything that you do in life or give in life, what you put in is what you get out of it. And local government's very, very much like that. If you throw yourself into it and you make the very best you can, the very best things will happen as well. So it takes time. It takes time when you go into a council, when you're first elected, to come to terms with things. Can I please suggest that if you've got something that you want to happen overnight, you need to be a little bit more considerate, because generally it takes about 4 years. That's what I've always said. From the time you have a really good plan, it takes about 4 years for it to come to fruition. It doesn't stop you having those plans. It doesn't stop you being part of seeing change, be part of that in your community as part of your council. But it is, everything always takes time and everything must always have community consultation. So I would encourage you, if you wish to become as a service to serve your community, I encourage you to stand for your local government. And I look forward, if you do get there, to be working with you. So I'd now like to welcome the WA Electoral Commissioner, Robert Kennedy, to provide an overview on the election process. Robert will be presenting with Phil Richards, Manager of Election Events. Thank you, Robert and Phil.
Thanks, Karen. And can I thank Walga and the department for hosting this opportunity for us to reach out to all of you who may be thinking about becoming candidates. It's a fantastic opportunity for us to get to as many people as possible. For those who are not aware of what the Commission does, we're a statutory authority, which, as the name implies, we run elections. We only do state elections and state by-elections and referenda. And in terms of local government elections, we will do ordinary and extraordinary elections for those councils that have an agreement with us to run their election. So in this particular set of elections that are coming up in October, we are running 124 of the 139 elections that will be conducted in October. And we are supporting many of the others with various supports such as software and other things. Can I endorse the Minister's comments and Karen's comments about the importance of candidates? Local government is very understated in the community, but they reach into so many aspects of people's lives, and it's important that people do stand up as candidates. It's also important for another very good reason, which is that I've just appointed 124 returning officers, and I'd like them to do a full job instead of having to end their appointment at the close of nominations where they may not have enough nominations. So if you're hesitating, please think about it. Our returning officers are the essential key to running the election. I'm just going to talk very briefly about the returning officer being your key contact, and then I'm going to hand over to Phil, who's going to run through a bit of the rules and the do's and the don'ts for being a candidate. So if you can sit through that, I think you'll learn a lot and add to what the Minister and Karen have already added. So if you can remember one thing from tonight, it's if you decide to become a candidate during the election period that's coming up, the key contact for you is going to be your returning officer. There's one per local government. We are simply not a big enough organisation that I have permanent staff that can run every election across the state when it comes to local government. And so we appoint returning officers. They are simply members of the community who put their hand up to help with elections. They are paid by us, but they are members of your community as well. And they conduct the election on our behalf. They will do things such as take your nomination, answer your questions throughout the election process, try to resolve simple complaints, supervise the count on election night, and decide if ballot papers are formal or informal. They will authorise a recount if one is necessary, and they will eventually declare the result. It is not I that makes the decision in every election. It is the returning officer who's present at the time who is satisfied that the election's been conducted in accordance with the rules, and they will declare the result and appoint you as a councillor. So please make use of them. Please try not to abuse them. As I said, they are community members. They didn't design the rules. They are just there to apply the rules, and they will try to do the best thing by you if you try to do the best thing by them. And I'm now going to hand over to Phil. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, so to start off with who can nominate. Qualifications for election to council is covered under section 2.19 of the Local Government Act. Basically, you've got to be 18 years of age or older, enrolled as elector of the district. So it's either as a resident from the residence roll, which is the state electoral roll, or as on the owner and occupiers roll. However, if your only entitlement of an elector is because you are nominated by a body corporate as on the owner occupiers roll, then you cannot stand as a candidate. You can vote, but you cannot stand as a candidate. You must have completed the mandatory course, the Local Government Candidate Induction, available on Department of Local Government's website, and cannot be a candidate in another election for councillor. However, if your local government is having a popularly elected shire president or mayoral election and a council election, you can nominate for those. You can nominate for mayor, shire president or councillor. Who cannot nominate? So these are people that are disqualified, member of parliament, solvent under administration, meaning of the Corporations Act, convicted of a crime and in prison, convicted in the preceding 5 years of a serious local government offence, have been convicted of an offence which the penalty was imprisonment for more than 5 years, elected member of another local government. So you can't nominate if you're a member of another local government. You'll need to resign that position before you nominate, and disqualified because of misapplication of funds and property. What makes an effective nomination? Completed and signed nomination form, including the reference number and date of completion of the online candidate induction. Completed candidate profile. Deposit of $100, and we say cash. Cash is king, although it can be EFT as long as it's credited to the local government before the close of nomination. For this election, there's also candidates can supply additional written statement containing information that the candidate considers relevant to their candidature, which is optional, and all that must be received by the returning officer and accepted before the close of nominations. Nomination Builder. So the WAC has created an online platform called Nomination Builder, which allows candidates to prepare their nomination form profile and upload their photograph online. You cannot, however, nominate online. This will allow the West Australian Electoral Commission to streamline the information for the election packages direct to the printer. It ensures that the information that the candidate puts in the nomination builder is what goes as part of the election package. You must provide the nomination ID to the returning officer when you create that, when you meet with the returning officer, so they can then bring up your online nomination builder application and then accept it then. And that nomination builder will be available from the Commission's website by the 18th of August this year. So this is what the nomination builder will look like. There's a little video there that you can watch and it'll run through the steps of doing this. So you enter all the information and then the candidate reviews, prints the form, confirms that they have reviewed the contents of the form. They've performed a character count on their profile text, so it's 1,000 characters, including spaces maximum. Reviewed all the profile text, contact details, and photograph. And on the form, as well as the notice board page, to ensure it appears as they would like it to appear. Print the page ready to sign and submit to the returning officer before the close of nominations. Candidate enters the text of the profile for the A4 notice, and that will be published on the local government website. In addition, the image of that A4 notice will accompany the election package together with the ballot paper and postal votes that go out. Candidate profile. It's sent out with your postal voting package and posted on the council's website. Must be written in English. Limit of 1,000 characters, including spaces, is to contain biographical information about the candidate, statement of their policies and beliefs, not to contain any information that the RO considers to be false, misleading, or defamatory. You can include a passport-size photograph, optional, so that's optional, of the candidate. It has to be head and shoulders. Not less than 6 months old, or if it is older than 6 months, as long as the RO considers the photo shows a reasonable likeness of the candidate. And you must supply at least one personal contact point, and that can be an email, phone address, social media address, mobile phone, anything, or multiples of those. So for this election, as it's coming the first time for the 2023 ordinary election, additional relevant information that a candidate can submit. It is optional. You don't have to do that. It has to be in the English language. Limit of not more than 2,000 characters, including spaces. And that's additional information that a candidate considers relevant to their candidature. Again, cannot contain any information that returning officer considers to be false, misleading, or defamatory. However, you cannot use nomination builder to prepare this 2,000 character additional information. You'll need to either handwrite it or put it into Word and print it out and submit it to the returning officer. And that will be placed on the local government's website. However, it will not be included in what goes out with the election packages. Electoral rolls available on nomination for the ward or the district they're contesting. A mayoral candidate is entitled to the whole district roll. Free to all candidates and members on request, copy of the residence roll and the owner occupiers roll. There is now a new addition to the Act and regulations regarding destruction, deletion of copies of the roll. A recipient must, before the end of the relevant period, provide to the Electoral Commissioner or the CEO of the local government a statutory declaration confirming that every supplied copy has been destroyed or permanently deleted from any computer, device, or medium or other storage system. Relevant period is for a candidate that has not been successful, 5 working days after the result of the election is declared. For a candidate elected, 5 working days after the term of the office ends, or when the office becomes vacant. So if they were to resign partway through, then within 5 days of their term of office becoming vacant. And a member who's not a candidate, the term of the member's current office ends or the office becomes vacant. That's again 5 working days. The statutory declaration must include identify the election, include a description of every supplied copy, including whether the supplied copy was in electronic form. In relation to every supplied copy, the steps described taken to destroy it or delete it permanently. And quite a hefty penalty. The penalty is a fine of $5,000 and a daily penalty of a fine of $50 for each day or part of during which the offence continues. So this relates to the 115 local government elections that are being conducted as full postal elections. The Commission will be lodging approximately 1.8 million election packages with Australia Post. So for the country local governments, the first lodgement will be from Friday the 15th of September. And for the metropolitan local governments from Wednesday the 20th of September. And it is also, we're hoping to have every election package in the hands of Australia Post by the end of the Friday, the 22nd of September. And so then it's dependent on the Australia Post delivery standards for that particular local government of that area. And as a candidate in a full postal election, you should actually maximise your campaigning around the delivery of the election packages rather than election day. The return of voting packages. Packages can be posted to the returning officer using the supplied reply paid envelope, or also can be hand delivered to the local government office. We'll be supplying a ballot box at these local governments and people can hand deliver it. So we will be posting the return numbers received by Australia Post on the WAEC website daily. So candidates and local governments get an idea of how the response rate's coming back. In October 2021, basically 50% of the packages that were returned were returned within the first 5 business days. And completed packages are returned to the returning officer care of the West Australian Electoral Commission. A couple of the rules, candidates cannot assist the elector to mark their ballot paper, or you or your representative cannot take custody of an envelope in which there is a postal vote. And the penalty for potential penalty, maximum penalty, is $5,000 or imprisonment for 1 year. So as a candidate or any of your representative, not to take custody of a envelope in which there's a postal vote. Obviously your own you can, but nobody else's. Replacement voting packages, if electors haven't received or their package was chomped away in your mailbox by snails, especially in the country area, it happens quite regularly, or the dog got to it or the kids ripped it up, you can actually be issued with a replacement voting package, and that's be available from the local government. So this now relates to voting in person elections rather than full postal election. So early voting to commence as soon as practical after the publication of the election notice, with a proposed publication date of the 20th of September. Early voting venues and times will be published in the election notice. And early voting closes at 4 p.m. on Friday, the 20th of October. As a voting in person election, you can actually also vote by postal vote, but it's actually by application rather than the election package automatically be sent out to every elector on the roll, which is what happens with a full postal election. People can apply. So electors who have applied for postal vote will be sending out their election package as soon as practical around the publication of the election notice. And again, return postal votes can be posted back to the returning officer using the supplied reply paid envelope or hand delivered to the local government office. Again, voting in person election, electors can vote at any polling place in the district on election day. At least one polling place must be open between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. And there can be other polling places that can be open for different hours or there may be multiple ones that are open from 8 till 6, depending on the requirements of the individual local government. Now we go to close the poll, 6 o'clock, election day. When the count commences, the ballot boxes are open and the counting of votes commences. Optional preferential voting is the counting method used. Mayoral count completed first and then the councillor, or determined first. They may be simultaneously started, but we have to work out the mayoral result potentially if there are candidates standing for both mayor and councillor. Scrutineers are available, can be observe the counting of the votes, so they can be in the counting area. The returning officer, the count may continue into Sunday, depending, and which may or may not include a recount. The returning officer may declare the results on the Monday after election day, depending on how the count goes. And again, results are posted both on local government websites and the Commission's website, elections.wa.gov.au. Authorisation of electoral material. Any handbills, pamphlets, notices, letters and other printed articles must have the name and address of the person authorising it and the name and address of the printer. The address cannot be a post office box, must be a physical address. All online election material requires the name and address of the person authorising the material. And also refer to the local government bylaws regarding placement of signs in any of your election material and signage. Each local government has individual bylaws in regarding size, where you can place them, etc. Scrutineers, candidates can appoint scrutineers. They must be appointed in writing by the candidate. Some of their rights. To enter and be in a polling place at any time before the close of poll, observe the conduct of the election, observe the checking of postal voting papers, and to be present after the close of poll and observe all proceedings of the count. Some of their restrictions, they're not to take part in the conduct of election, including taking custody of postal votes, not to record the names of persons obtaining ballot papers, especially for voting in person elections, and not to be in a polling place if another scrutiny appointed by the same candidate is also there, unless they're casting their own or delivering their own vote. That's about it.
Wow, thank you. You did run through that rather quickly. So there will be questions at the end. So thanks very much, Robert and Phil. We will move on now to the next part of our session. Thank you. So please welcome Mustafa Yildiz, Director of Support and Engagement, Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries, to speak on the role of Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries, and you'll learn that that's a mouthful you'll get used to, as the regulator of the Local Government Act and regulations and key compliance provisions for elected members and candidates, including the Code of Conduct. So there you go. Succinct, please, Mustafa.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Olga, for hosting us. That's an inside joke. If anyone doesn't know, I do tend to talk a bit, but I'll try and stay on cue with that. So, becoming an elected member and the role of the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries. At DLGSC, an abbreviation and acronym that we do use, our role is very much as the regulator of the sector and of the Local Government Act and the associated regulations. We have a clear vision to provide and assist with providing a vibrant, inclusive and connected WA community through the local government sector. That mission then is to enable dynamic and inclusive communities that support the West Australian economy and the communities. And the section that we are from, the local government division, the portfolio area contributes to this vision by supporting and enabling a robust local government sector to achieve positive outcomes for communities throughout Western Australia. The activities that the local government division in particular focus on: financial management, governance, conduct and operations. And underneath there you'll see the actual particular issues or the areas of which we regulate or support through the functions and activities of the Department of Local Government. So our regulatory mission and the principles that underpin that: to support and regulate WA local governments using capability building and risk-based approach, where oversight, support and intervention efforts are targeted based on analysis of greatest risks and informed by relevant legislation and an understanding of the challenges local governments experience. Bit of a mouthful, but in essence, the department itself provides regulatory support as well as enforcement actions, all on a risk-based approach. Ultimately, the Local Government Act and the regulations themselves provide the legislative framework in which the local government sector operates within, but that needs to be operationalised and also to provide the right level of support across the whole sector. As anyone knows, and for those out there who are considering becoming a candidate for local government elections, every local government is unique and different across the whole state. You'll never see two local governments that are the same. However, the legislative framework does apply across the whole sector, and predominantly the same sort of compliance requirements and legislative requirements across the whole sector. The principles that underpin our regulatory mission: being informed and adaptive as the sector requires, also to the legislative landscape, capability focus and building capability within the sector, local government autonomous bodies can make their own decisions, can do things for their community and really focus on delivering those. The department themselves provides and tries to assist in providing capability and building capability within the sector. We're responsive and trying to be as flexible and agile to what's happening in the sector and targeting our assistance as well as any standards that we look to set based on what is happening. A risk-based approach. Ultimately, with limited resources, we do like to target and tend to try to target our resources based on the greatest level of risk. As anyone who's been involved in any of the reform processes, the department attempts to and hopefully does collaborate as much as possible on some of the changes that are coming, so that way the sector is not caught unawares, but also engaging with the community in general in regards to what the expectations are for local government and how they should be regulated, and ultimately being accountable and transparent across everything that we do. So, what are the outcomes we expect and what is the model that we apply? That's the model there in itself, and it's underpinned by three particular aspects to it: fostering best practice, understanding, and I might just read my notes because my eyes aren't that good anymore, understanding performance and supporting compliance. And underneath each of those, there are, in essence, 10 particular aspects of what we do. I won't go through them in particular detail because they are up on the slide. But in essence, they all need to work as a synergy to ensure that we're meeting our regulatory outcomes. And so what are they? What are we trying to achieve? Local governments exercise their autonomy in meeting their legislative requirements and community needs. Local governments comply with their legislative and other requirements, and our activities as the department support local governments to develop capacity needed to comply with those requirements. And ultimately, our main regulatory activity is to empower local governments to facilitate positive community outcomes. So, as a candidate for becoming a local government elected member, there are certain things we suggest or you must do before you consider making your nomination. As my colleague Phil mentioned, you have to complete the mandatory online induction, and that is on our website. And in essence, it takes you through a process, a few questions, a bit of information, and you have to complete it before you can actually nominate. And I'll go into a bit more detail in a couple of other slides. We also suggest attending a candidate information session, and we've run quite a few now, and there'll also be a few run at particular local governments. It's a good opportunity to go and listen to the people who, put these things into place, but also can answer questions about certain aspects, whether that's to do with the election process, the local government itself, becoming a council member, what those obligations are, and what statutory compliance obligations you'll have as a council member. We also advise candidates should look at the particular local government's policies, plans, meeting minutes, reports, trying to understand what that local government's focused on, what the strategic community plans trying to deliver, and how their reports sort of set out to achieve what they're trying to decide to do. Definitely attend a council meeting, speak to current council members, understand how that operates, and see that in person. It is highly advisable to go visit a local council meeting. They all run a little bit differently. They're all presided by individual presidents and mayors who have nuances in how they manage the meeting. So it's a good idea to see how that works, because if you are elected, one of the key obligations you'll have is to attending and participating in council meetings. Plan your campaign, understand what your platform is and the best way to let your community know about yourself and what you plan to do as a council member. Definitely build that into your profile, and the returning officer through the nomination builder will assist with some of that, and also part of it will be whatever you wish to tell, provided that it meets the requirements of the Act in regards to what you include in there. And lastly, book your appointment with the returning officer. There'll be numerous appointments available. We always suggest don't take the last appointment just in case things go wrong. Once nominations are closed, that's it. And to be very firm on that, the returning officer will not accept any nominations past the closing date. So the local government candidate induction mandatory sort of training, it is compulsory to complete. It takes only about 30 minutes. And upon completion, you're provided an email with a unique registration number. If you don't receive the email, it may have gone into your junk email, so please check that. But if not, I'll provide you some details at the end on who to call, and that'll be our team. They'll provide you that nomination, that registration number. And the returning officer will require that number to accept your nomination and cannot proceed with your nomination without that number. So we also suggest printing a copy of the email so you have that with you at the time. So what's covered? A bit of everything in regards to local governments, but specifically about government in Australia at the high level across all tiers of government, specifically local government in WA and the decision-making process of local government, and then distinction between the roles. So the role of council members, what community does in that respect, the local government employees, and the distinction between council members and local government employees is quite an important understanding to have before you do nominate. The types of decisions that council members make and understanding a bit of certain things that are delegated to the CEO and administration to undertake and make decisions on. The qualities and skills of effective council members. Whilst we say it's not mandatory to have those, it's good to be aware of what qualities and skills are expected, because the role of a council member is quite diverse and those skills are important to have. A bit of flavour on the code of conduct, and I've got a bit more information on that in other slides. Obligations and what you need to declare in respect of gifts and conflicts of interest. A bit of flavour in regards to local elections and what to expect as part of that process and what you can do in part of your campaigning process. Also, the declaration you need to make if you are successful as a council member and the remuneration you can expect to receive, which is set by the Salary Allowances Tribunal and is contingent on the band or class of local government that you'll be successful as a candidate for. Also, consideration of why you are standing for council and what council actually does and can you achieve why you're for the reasons that you're standing and what you should do from here. Any questions, please, that email address there is a good link into that. We can answer any queries in regards to the candidate induction. Also, if there's any queries in respect of your unique registration number that you should receive upon completing the candidate induction course. So, the code of conduct and why it's important to discuss this. The Local Government Model Code of Conduct Regulations was introduced in February 2021 and applies to all candidates as well as council members for this election. Please note, though, in regards to the issues that the Code of Conduct seeks to regulate, it would be a good idea for every candidate to familiarise yourself with the Code of Conduct, because if you are successful through your candidacy, enforcement action can be taken against you, complaints can be made against you once you are elected to council. But as a candidate, and once your nomination is accepted, the provisions of the Code of Conduct do apply. So, noting that any alleged breach of the Code of Conduct may only be addressed once you're elected, candidates are expected throughout the whole candidacy process to demonstrate professional and ethical behaviour through their campaigns, and there are penalties that do apply. Minor breaches of the Code of Conduct are to be submitted to the local government and then are forwarded on to the Local Government Standards Panel for determination. Serious breaches, on the other hand, if they do apply, are considered by the Department of Local Government or the State Administrative Tribunal. They need to be considered in regards to anything from the minor breaches or any appeals from minor breach complaints. So, what does the Code of Conduct cover? The regulations, in particular, regulations 17 to 22, and as I said out on there, use and misuse of resources and information. There's specific provisions around how to do that. The one that would expect to cause most foul as part of campaigning during a local government election campaign is securing personal advantage or disadvantaging others. And it is a bit of a warning that the department would like to make sure that candidates understand that it's not carte blanche, that you can go out there and say certain things about other candidates and make allegations or cast disparaging comments. Because if you are elected, the code of conduct will apply, and it can be a determination that your comments as part of the campaign could be disadvantaging other people. Regulation 18 in particular deals with that. So it is good to be very careful about how you're campaigning and apply the highest ethical standard through that process. Council members can't involve themselves in administrative functions, and that's quite clear in Regulation 19. Regulation 20 deals with the relationship between council members and local government employees, and the clear distinction between those roles, and there can not be specific instruction from a council member, an individual council member, to local government employees. Obviously, council makes all the decisions they need to be implemented. It's a little bit different when it comes to individual council members. And Regulation 21 and 22 sets out the disclosure of information provisions and the protection around some confidential information, as well as the requirement to disclose certain interests of impartiality. Oops, I hit the wrong button, apologies for that. So, as you may be aware, and hopefully you are as a candidate for the local government elections, the Local Government Act is going through a reform process, and tranche one of that particular reform process ended up with a bill being passed in Parliament on the 11th of May 2023, and some of the changes did get implemented in regards to special electors meetings, parental leave for council members, compliance exemptions, as well as changes in respect to this upcoming election. The main key change is the change from first past the post-election voting process to now optional preferential voting. This now aligns with state and federal government elections, and in essence provides the voter or the elector the option to determine if they only want to vote for one candidate, vote for more than one, or to provide their preferences across all the candidates. So the option is for the voter to be able to determine how they wish to vote, but all local government elections will provide for optional preferential voting. This is now part of the legislation and will be for this election going forth. Also, just to note that for those local governments at the band or class 3 and 4 that can determine the elections for mayor and president elections, OPV will also apply for those. And in essence, this should provide a greater democratic result in regards to the elections. So what is in place for these elections for the 2023 elections? The county provisions, as I mentioned just previously, optional preferential voting. There's been changes to the number and the structure of councils, and these have all now been finalised and will be in place for the 2025 elections. Some councils had a reduction in representation, and some councils now have moved from council-elected mayors and presidents to now popularly elected mayors and presidents, i.e. that means that the people in the community will be voting for them. Requirements now, as my colleague Phil mentioned, the return and destruction of the electoral roll upon completion of a term if you are successful elected, or 5 days after the election if you're unsuccessful, with the completion of that stat deck to confirm that the roll has been destroyed. Other offences relating to the misuse and appropriate use of the electoral roll, now it's made clear, and Phil set down what those are. Now, backfilling vacancies due to the election of an incumbent councillor to the position of mayor or president. And what that means is if a person has run for mayor or president and is successful, but also ran for a councillor position, in essence, that position can be filled by the next person on the ballot that received the next number of votes. Backfilling extraordinary council vacancies, if during the period that the Act sets out, that if there is an extraordinary vacancy that does occur, the person who finished second on the ballot, or the person who was unsuccessful, depending on how many vacancies that they are, may backfill that role if they still wish to. They'll be given the opportunity to do so within the period that allows for. There'll be a period that unfortunately will still require an extraordinary election, but there'll still be the period towards the end of a term that the Electoral Commissioner can determine whether to hold that seat vacant until the election and the end of towards the end of that particular year. Also, there's also the additional information that can be produced by candidates in their candidate statement now. So all that will be in place for the 2023 elections. Going forth into the 2025 elections, there'll be other changes that will be in place. So we're looking at there, the statewide caretaker period. Some local governments now have caretaker policies leading into the election. There'll be a mandated statewide caretaker period that'll be in place for the 2025 elections. And what that will mean is there'll be certain decisions of significance that councils cannot make or should not make during, definitely cannot make during that period of the caretaker period. The consistency in size and structure of councils, while some were implemented definitely for this election, where councils have reduced, especially where there's been a reduction of more than one elected member position, some of that will be tiered across the 2023 into the 25 election period. Recounting of votes will be in place for the 2025 elections. Enrolment changes to address sham leases. For those who have followed the City of Perth inquiry and some of the findings around sham leases, the enrolment processes will be in place for the 2025 election, requiring certification or evidence to prove that you have a right to be able to be on the roll in regards to the leases that are in place. And lastly, additional information provided by candidates as part of the nomination process about being an occupier on the roll, and that also leads into the sham lease provisions. So where does that take us into now? So all of the local government tranche 1 reforms will be in place, have been enacted, or will be in place for the 2025 elections. Tranche 2 is also coming, and we're expecting to have a bill in Parliament by November 2023. And the main issues that will be, the main legislative provisions will introduce the Office of the Local Government Inspector and monitors. The inspector himself will be appointed to handle all complaints, manage investigations, and coordinate the proactive resolution of significant problems. And specialist independent monitors may be appointed by the inspector to visit and attend and work within local governments to assist with fixing problems and hopefully provide a faster resolution to some of those issues. So, any questions, please feel free to call our advisory line or email us any of those particular, the LG hotline email address, or visit our website. As a candidate, you must go and complete the candidate induction session, and you can find that on our website. That concludes me.
Thank you, Mustafa. Yeah, you were as succinct as you could be. So, thank you. Thanks very much. So next, I welcome James McGovern, the Manager of Governance and Procurement at Walga. And James will provide an overview of the role of an elected member and what you should expect if you are elected to council. And here we go, James. Succinct too, please, James.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll be as
It's my favourite word, folks.
I'll be as succinct as a Matilda shootout on Saturday night. And if you love local government as much as I do and as much as we at Walga do, you'll find just as exciting, I'm sure. In tonight's presentation, we will briefly look at what you will expect should you be successful in your candidacy and be elected as a council member. Those people elected to office will be required to undertake mandatory council member essentials training. And tonight's presentation is based on the 5 core modules: understanding local government, serving on council, meeting procedures, conflicts of interest, and understanding financial reports and budgets. And we'll close tonight with a brief summary of the support that is in place to assist you as a council member. We will start with the understanding local government module, which will assist you in your transition from a private citizen to a councillor. Local government in WA is a big industry. There are 139 local governments with over 1,200 council members representing communities right across the state. The sector employs over 22,000 people. And as can be seen, as an industry, the sector contributes significantly to the state economy with $4.5 billion in expenditure and management of almost $50 billion in assets. Bearing in mind its original formation as road boards, it is significant that local governments to this day continue to manage the vast majority of the state's road network. Now, local governments are created under residual powers retained by the states upon federation. The WA Constitution Act requires the state legislature to maintain a system of local government and to provide it with relevant powers. It is therefore often said that local government is a creature of state legislation. We are currently operating under the Local Government Act 1995. This Act is designed in a way to provide separate roles and responsibilities for the Council, led by the Mayor or President, and the administration, led by the Chief Executive Officer. The Act is based on the principle of general competence, which means that a local government can make any decision it believes is in the best interest of its community, but does not conflict with statute law or common law. And the Local Government Act does not specifically set out the services that must be provided, but there are many other acts that do. For example, planning and building legislation requires local governments to perform functions in relation to land use planning, development and building approvals, and perform swimming pool inspections. Local governments have wide-ranging discretion to determine other services that it will provide to the community, which typically include recreation services and facilities, and arts and cultural functions and events. The range of mandatory and discretionary services provided by local governments is generally categorised as people services, property services, and regulatory services. Okay, so we'll now look at serving on council and the legislative provisions that establish separate roles and responsibilities between the council and the administration. When considering roles and responsibilities, it is important to bear in mind that the Local Government Act was created with separate powers in mind. We see this intent in the following reading speech extract when the current Act was read into Parliament. The new Act will provide a clear distinction between the representative and policy-making role of the elected councillors and the administrative and advisory role of the Chief Executive Officer and other staff. So we will now look at how the Act was quite deliberately written with distinct roles for the Council, represented by council members, and roles for the administration, led by the Chief Executive Officer. The Act provides that it is the role of Council to govern the local government's affairs and that it is responsible for the performance of the local government's functions. Further, it is to oversee the allocation of the local government's finances and resources, most significantly when adopting the annual budget, as well as determining the policies of the local government. And here is a description of the role of a councillor incorporating representative, leadership, communication, and decision-making roles. Note here that the Local Government Act does not provide councillors with individual powers. We will take a closer look at the role of the councillor soon by bringing to life some of these roles. The Mayor or President has additional roles that relate to the leadership of council and the community. Unlike individual councillors, mayors and presidents have one important individual power, authorising unbudgeted expenditure in response to public emergencies and natural disasters. Here are the functions of the Chief Executive Officer who leads the administration. Notice that these functions are operational in nature as compared to the Council's governing and strategic role and the Council's representative and decision-making role. These functions can only be performed by the Chief Executive Officer or by the professional staff under the direction of the CEO. So understanding and observing the separate roles and responsibilities is fundamental to a local government providing efficient and effective governance. In practice, while the two sides of the local government, the council and the administration, perform separate roles, they do so collaboratively to deliver great outcomes for their community. And the collective outcomes from the council and the administration working together will happen in the name of the local government, which is a legal entity established as a body corporate. Now let's go back to the role of a councillor and bring to life the way in which you will perform those highlighted roles. Represents the interests of electors, ratepayers, and residents of the district. If you're elected to council, the first duty you will perform before serving in office will be the signing of this declaration. By signing this declaration, you are pledging a commitment to represent the interests of all people in the district, which echoes the words of the Minister of Local Government earlier this evening, and to do so faithfully, honestly, and with integrity through your office on council, and that you'll observe the code of conduct in doing so, as Mustafa spoke about tonight. Facilitates communication between the community and the council. So if you're elected to council, it's very likely you'll receive direct communications from residents by phone, by email, and when meeting people in the community. Here is a good example of a councillor receiving an inquiry that relates to an operational matter. It could be a pothole in the road, a broken swing at the playground, or a barking dog. But we now know that operational matters are the function of the CEO and the administration. And here we see the council member doing the right thing by providing good advice to the community member and the administration taking care of the matter. Participates in the local government's decision-making processes at council and committee meetings. So arguably the most important role of a council member is that of a decision maker at formal meetings. And listed here are a range of typical matters dealt with at each council meeting. Your decision making is so important that the Local Government Act states that a council member who is present at a meeting must vote. And this takes us on to the next module of council member essentials, meeting procedures. The meeting procedures module will provide comprehensive information on the life cycle of decision making, including the development of the agenda, which includes detailed reports and recommendations by professional staff under the direction of the CEO, the assistance provided to council members by the administration before formal meetings to answer any questions that you may have, and the protection of the rights of all council members to participate equally in a meeting, have their voice heard in debate, and contribute to the decisions made by council. Council meetings are subject to a considerable range of provisions in the Local Government Act, regulations, and in meeting procedures local laws. There's also a particular focus in legislation on the rights of the community to be involved in council meetings. For example, the public have a right to attend meetings, and at the beginning of every council meeting, time is set aside for public question time. Local governments will soon be required to live broadcast or audio record their meetings, creating a permanent public record. The public have a right to access the agenda before the meeting and to access minutes resulting from the council meeting. And the public can even call a special meeting of electors where they can raise one or more matters for council's attention. In the very near future, all local governments will conduct meetings under a single uniform meeting procedures regulation rather than individually adopted local laws. We heard earlier tonight about the importance of the Model Code of Conduct, and the new Code of Conduct provisions seen here have introduced new behavioural requirements for individual council members at council and committee meetings. This heightened level of accountability means it is of great importance that council members fully understand that there are expectations of appropriate behaviours at council meetings and committee meetings. Abiding by the code is not only an ethical obligation, given that any behavioural failure that breaches the code may result in a complaint. And let's close this module by doing a quick quiz. True or false? At a council meeting, I can exercise my freedom of speech and make any comment that I wish. What do you think? This is, of course, false. An important principle applying to local government council meetings is one of qualified privilege. As opposed to parliamentary privilege, a council member has limited defences should they be the subject of a claim for damages based on alleged defamatory statements associated with their role on council. So as we have seen, one of the most important functions you will perform in your time on council is that of a decision maker. But the Local Government Act also provides limitations which, if they apply to you, will exclude you from being present at council meetings and from voting. These matters are covered in the conflicts of interest module. Categories of conflict of interest are financial interest. Is where you have an interest in a matter before council involving a financial gain, benefit, loss, or detriment. Indirect financial interest is where you or a person with whom you are closely associated has an interest in a matter before council. And proximity interest is where you have an interest in land that adjoins any land subject of a planning, zoning, or development matter before council. An impartiality interest is an interest you have in a matter due to kinship, friendship, or membership of an association. The Act directs that where you have a financial, indirect financial, or proximity interest, you cannot participate or vote on that matter in which you have declared the interest. You'll have to leave the council chamber prior to the commencement of the debate. Conversely, declaring an impartiality interest does not have the same consequence. You stay in the council chamber, debate, and as we saw previously, you must vote on the matter. So it is appreciated that you might wear many hats in your local community. Our advice is that you should always consider your obligations to declare interests from the perspective that you are always a councillor. You should guard against attempting to separate your private interests from your role in public office when considering conflicts of interest. The Understanding Financial Reports and Budgets module provides a detailed summary of the strategic planning process of local government and the integration of council plans into the annual budget and the regular financial reporting process. A council plan, currently referred to as the Strategic Community Plan, is a foundation for modern local government, providing the structure by which local governments strategically plan for their community's needs. A robust strategic planning process is central to a local government meeting its statutory function, providing for the good government of persons in the district. A council plan is multifaceted and includes a range of informing strategies that are relative to the unique nature of each local government. Council plans are therefore not one size fits all, and there's a great variety from one local government to the next. The output of a council plan process is a 4-year corporate business plan, and this directly informs a local government's annual budget process. Council plans are not set and shelved. There's a regular cycle of review and renewal, which ensures the plan remains aligned to community expectations. Earlier, we had a quick look at the variety of mandatory and discretionary services provided by local government, many of which are seen here in the graphic. The council plan is the process that solidifies the strategic service delivery objectives of the local government and enables all services to be properly planned and resourced. That brings us to the end of the 5 modules. We'll now look at support available for council members. The Local Government Act legislation supports council members in many ways. The WA Salaries and Allowances Tribunal determines a range of meeting fees or annual allowances payable to council members to remunerate you for the time you spend on council. The Local Government Act permits reimbursement of expenses incurred in your role, including childcare costs due to attendance at meetings. We heard earlier about the new parental leave provisions that entitle council members to 6 months leave where they or their spouse or de facto partner gives birth, adopts or fosters a child. And new provisions allow payment of fees for attending mandatory training and continuing professional development, plus reimbursement of related expenses under a policy adopted by the council. And finally, the Minister for Local Government plans to introduce a payment of superannuation to council members in a future amendment to the Local Government Act. Well, that brings to a close this presentation. Thanks for attending this evening, and we'll now answer some of the questions that have been raised during the course of the 3 presentations.
Thanks very much, James. So Tony Brown will facilitate the question and answer session. So Tony, do you wish for Mustafa and move to front here?
Yes, please, President. If we could have a representative from each of the organisations, that would be great.
Thanks, Mr Brown.
Thank you, President. We have a number of questions that have come through this evening. The first question is, I have a complaint about a candidate making false allegations about another candidate. Who can I complain to? I think that's one for you, Mustafa.
Thank you, Tony. Good question. As I introduced before, local government model code of conduct regulations applies to candidates contesting a local government election and can be enforced against a candidate once they are elected to council. So the candidate's conduct in making the false allegation contravenes the rule of conduct, and I would suggest that's regulation 18, causing detriment to a person, and that person is or becomes a council member. The complainant can make a complaint to the local government's complaint officer, and the complaint will be forwarded to and determined by the local government standards panel.
Thank you, Mustafa. The next question, is an elected member permitted to abstain from voting if they're at a meeting? That's one for you, James.
Yes, and no, you cannot abstain from voting. As we saw tonight, the Local Government Act is very clear that if an elected member is present at a meeting, then they must vote. It's a breach of the Act not to vote if you're in attendance at a meeting. It's different for council members who've declared a financial interest, indirect financial interest or proximity interest, as they're prohibited from remaining in the council chamber, participating in debate or voting due to their interest in the matter before council. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, James. The third question we've received this evening is, can my local government choose and exercise the option to not do preferential voting for the local government elections? I think that's one for the department.
Thank you, Tony. Another good question. The reforms to the Local Government Act that we introduced this year did change the voting process from first past the post to now optional preferential voting. But as I did mention, the option is not for the local government, it's for the elector or the voter to determine how they wish to vote. So these changes now bring it in line with state and federal elections, and in essence restores the right to electors to express their voting preferences. So just confirming again, it is not an option for the local government, it's an option for the elector, and the elector can determine how to nominate their preferences either for each candidate, all candidates, and in order of their preferences, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa. I've got a question here for the Electoral Commission. What is the key dates for a candidate?
Okay, thank you. The key dates, roll close date is 5 p.m. on Friday, the 25th of August. The opening of nominations is Thursday, the 31st of August. And the close of nominations is 4 p.m. on Thursday, the 7th of September.
Thanks very much, Phil. We've got another question for the Electoral Commission. As a candidate, I will operate a campaign Facebook account, but also comment on other discussions on other people's accounts. Which of these needs to be included to include an election material authorisation statement?
Okay, good question. And it's one that we get a lot of questions regarding authorisation. Your own campaign page will need to carry the authorisation statement, including your name and address, and it cannot be a post office box, or the same details of the person operating the page on your behalf. This is to allow electors to identify the authors of the information on display to ask questions. If you are adding commentary on other people's posts, you do not require authorisation statements for each post, as long as people can identify you as making the comment. If you make a comment in a public social media forum, you may wish to identify yourself as, such as Mary Jones, candidate in the election of for whatever, so people know your status.
Thanks very much, Phil. We have another question. I have a very busy job and often travel, so can I participate in council or committee meetings by phone or video link? I think that's one for you, James.
Thanks, Tony. And the good news is, yes, you can attend meetings electronically. There are some very beneficial recent amendments to the Local Government Act that now permit a council member to attend up to 6 ordinary council meetings in a 12-month period. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, James. And I'll just follow up, James. There's been one come in when you were talking about strategic community plans and that it may change. So you said currently called the SCP. Is it changing?
Yes, it's changing to council plans. There'll be a transitional process. The strategic community plan will continue. And I might also let Mustafa to give us an idea of how long it will take before we transition from strategic community planning to council plans.
Thanks for the suicide handball there, James. You were expecting the regulations to make their way through some of the processing this year. The commencement date will be determined once those regulations are in place.
Right. Thank you very much. Further question. I want to see which candidates have received electoral gifts during the election. Where can I find that information? One for you, Phil.
Yeah, okay. Your local government CEO is responsible for maintaining and publishing the electoral gifts register. And that also needs to be published online. Any gift with a value of $300 or 2 or more gifts with a value of over $300 need to be disclosed. And the disclosure period commences 6 months prior to election day, which is on April the 21st this year. And you should contact your local government to review the register.
Right. Thank you, Phil. We've got a further one for you from a candidate who states, of course, I expect to win, but do I get my $100 back if I'm not elected?
Yes. The $100 nomination fee is refunded to all candidates elected. So if you get elected, you get your money back, or to any non-elected candidate that receives at least 5% of the total number of first preference votes included in the count.
Right, thank you very much. And we've got lots for the WA Electoral Commission. We've got another one. After candidates submit their candidate profiles to the returning officer and has been approved, that is in respect to content and length checks, can that profile be modified at all after nomination?
Okay. As mentioned, the candidate profile is one of the requirements for effective nomination to be made. Once the nomination has been accepted by the returning officer, the profile will be published and the cannot be amended. If a candidate wishes to amend their profile, they'll need to withdraw their nomination and submit another nomination in its place with the revised profile. And profiles and nominations cannot be modified, withdraw after the close of nominations. It has to be done before the close of nominations.
Right. Thanks very much, Phil. We're getting lots about elections and nominating. When and how do we find out who the returning officer is, and how do we make an appointment?
Okay, the returning officer's details will be available on the West Australian WA Electoral Commission's website from this Friday, 18th of August. In addition, the publication of the election corporate nominations notice has been prepared, and that will be forwarded to all local governments, and that will have the list of all the vacancies and the returning officer's name and contact details.
Right, thank you, Phil. We've got one here for you, Mustafa. Is the election of president to be by preferential voting?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Got a couple just coming in at the moment. How are the statements presented on the local government website? As this has not been done in previous years, to my knowledge, I don't know how it will be shown. Maybe James, if you can answer that one.
Yes, so for the first time, statements up to 2,000 characters are permitted to be put on local government's websites in addition to the mandatory profile. It's always been a part of the election process. But local governments have traditionally promoted elections on their websites, and many have dedicated election pages where candidate profiles and the new additional statements will be published. So you can rest assured your local government will have that sorted in a very prominent place on the website.
Right. Thanks, James. I've got another one for you. If the council makes a decision and you do not agree with it, and you're a councillor, can you speak publicly against such decision?
That's an interesting question, because the new code of conduct, there is a requirement now to abide by the decisions of the council and to abide by the council's policies. But technically, if someone is not satisfied with the decision of the council, they do have the opportunity to move a revocation motion at a future meeting. Now, that's been a feature of the Local Government Act for many years. It does require the support of a certain number of your fellow councillors to get the item on the agenda in the first place. and will require an absolute majority to overturn the decision of the council. So there's a yes and a no. Don't make it public. Go straight through the process and use the provision the Act has already provided for to make your case that the decision should be revoked and changed.
Thanks very much. We've got lots of questions coming in. Another one for the Electoral Commission. When it comes to including the name and address of people authorising online election material, does that need to be on the account or on each individual post?
Online, and it needs to be on your leading page, your about page, or your so it's your home page, about page for some social media places. So yeah, on the main your main page type thing, landing page, home page, that type of thing.
Great, thank you very much. But a further question, do I have to wait for my nomination to be accepted before starting to campaign?
No, you don't. You can start your campaigning. You can have your information ready, and you can start door knocking, and you can go out there and say you're going to run as a candidate. You intend to run as a candidate, and you can start your campaigning before you officially nominate. Yes.
Thank you very much. And I've got one for you, Mustafa. Can you clarify the earlier comments on destroying information relating to electoral rolls?
The provisions around the requirements.
Yes.
Yes. So if you are successful as an elected member, you get to maintain the electoral roll for the period of your term, and then after, obviously, at the expiry of your term, you have to destroy that roll. And destroying, you need to say what you've physically done. So if you have an electronic version of it, you've deleted it. If you've got a hard copy version of it, you've disposed of it through confidential disposal processes. If you're unsuccessful, I think the provision is 5 days after the election, those same obligations do apply, and you must provide a statutory declaration to state that you've actually done that.
Great, thanks very much, Mustafa. There's a further question has come in. Once elected, does a sitting councillor who is then elected as president need to do the councillor course exam? I think this is referring to the 5 council member essentials courses required to be completed in the first 12 months.
I'll take that one, Tony. Yeah. So people who are elected are required to do the mandatory training. There is an exemption provision that says that a person who was elected in the 2019 elections, who's already undertaken council member essentials training, isn't required to do so. But I think we should all bear in mind that since 2019, there have been 2 significant Act amendments. We heard about the implementation, for example, of the new Code of Conduct. During COVID times, there were changes to the Act that introduced provisions that apply. And of course, the 2023 Act amendments have introduced a range of amendments, which we've heard about again tonight with the election process, etc. So in terms of getting a good education about what the Local Government Act says now, the only way to really get that is to participate in the Council Member Essentials training. For WALGA's part, we've made sure that Council Member Essentials is totally up to date and contains commentary, advice and guidance on the current provisions of the Local Government Act as they are from when the time you start on council.
Thanks, James. Got a nice, easy one. Is door knocking allowed to introduce yourself to the community?
Yes, it's probably a very effective method of, still a very effective method of campaigning.
And a further one, election-wise, are previous candidate profile statements archived online anywhere?
No, they're not. It's up to the candidate to have kept a copy or have that available if they wish to redirect that. And that's probably also changed from the last election was 800 characters, including spaces. Now it's 1,000 characters. And previous to that, it was 150 words. So the actual length of the profiles have changed over the last 3 elections.
Thanks, Phil. We've actually got a request if you could repeat those important dates again, the key dates for a candidate.
Okay, close of roll for enrolments is 5 p.m. Friday, 25th of August. Nominations open on Thursday, 31st of August, and nominations close at 4 p.m. Thursday, 7th of September. So there's an 8-day nomination period from the 31st of August to 4 p.m. on Thursday, the 7th of September.
Thanks very much. We've got one for Mustafa or James. Is it a requirement that presidents and mayors must run meetings, or can they delegate?
I might kick off with that one. Yeah. In fact, the way I like to characterise it is it's a privilege that the mayor or president presides at meetings. And I say it's a privilege because when you go through the council members' essentials training around meeting procedures, you'll see we use the phrase that a councillor, I should say, presiding member is the servant of the meeting. So a presiding member takes a less active role in the meetings and ensures that everyone's rights and entitlements, everyone has access to the rights and entitlements at the meeting. And the second part of the question, Tony, was.
Sorry.
I
think that was-
to that.
No,
Just came to this. And yes, and if the president or mayor is unavailable or unwilling to preside at a meeting, the duty falls to the deputy mayor or deputy president. Thank you, Tony.
Question, is there a draw for positions on the ballot paper? And if so, where and when does this take place?
Yes, there is. After the close of nominations, the returning officer will read out all the people, all the candidates that are nominated. If there are more candidates than vacancies, then they will conduct a draw for position on the ballot paper. That happens as soon as practical after the close of nominations, 4 p.m. on Thursday, the 7th of September. And that will be at the location where the close of nominations is being held, which is generally the local government office.
Right, thank you. And how do people vote if they are away for the election period?
Okay, could depend on whether it's a voting in person election or a full postal election. So for a full postal election, election packages are sent out to the elector's address. Either if they have supplied a postal address, it'll be mailed out to that postal address. As I mentioned, they will start going out for country districts around the 15th of September through to metropolitan from the 20th of September. If electors are going to be away, they need to probably arrange for somebody to forward the mail to wherever the people are going to be in a week or 2 weeks' time from when that election is. If it's a voting in person election, they can apply for a postal vote and they can nominate an address somewhere in the world, and the postal vote will be sent out to that address. Whether the elector receives it or not, and gets it back in time, that's totally up to the postal system. There is early voting, as I mentioned, approximately 4 weeks prior to election day. So there's a 4-week period for voting in person elections where people can vote early, do an early vote. So,
Right, thanks, Phil. Interesting question come in. What will happen if the voice referendum occurs on election day?
okay, under the Local Government Act, the local government election cannot be held on the same day as a Commonwealth election or referendum. The date will need to be moved by order by the governor up to 2 weeks after the 21st. So possibly 28th of October or the 4th of November.
Right, thank you very much. Another one for the Electoral Commission. Can you use bullet points in the profile and additional information?
Yes, you can. It's bullet point will be classed as a character, but yes, you can use bullet points. So the A4 one that goes on the website will have that, and our change to our system is taking an image of that A4 and putting that in the election package. So bullet points will also accompany the ballot paper that goes out to all electors.
Okay, thank you very much. We've had a flood of more questions, but I think we might call it a halt at that. So we've received more questions that we don't have time for. We will respond to all questions following the webinar, and they'll be posted on the WELGA website. We might hand back to the WELGA president to wrap up. So thank you, gentlemen.
So thanks, everybody, for your participation this evening, and to the panel members. It was, and Tony facilitating the question. I was watching the numbers of the questions going up on the screen, and there's quite a few there, folks. So please make sure that you look at the WELGA website and to follow up on the questions that perhaps weren't answered for you tonight. And also, if you care about your community and tonight has piqued your interest further, please make sure that you go on to the department, the DLGC GSC website and do the induction, the candidate induction course. So that's the first step that you must undertake. So please do that and consider being putting your hand up for being an elected member. So as I mentioned earlier, the recording of this webinar will be available on the websites of all these three agencies that presented to us tonight. They will be distributed to all local governments, and hopefully the local governments will put them on their own websites. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining in this evening, and have a good evening. And I look forward to catching up with you all next year.